All right, so the presentation that I'm going to be focusing on comes from an ARC project, or Australian Research Council funded project called Shifting the Culture of Out-of-Field Professional Education for Teachers, so Cirkony. And the second presentation is going to follow on from this one as well. What I'm going to be presenting on here is looking specifically at providing a current state mapping of the pathways that teachers can have to teaching, to becoming in field when they're actually out within the Australian context. So this is the team, and you can see some of these people are online with us today. Also, we have Greg in the room. I'd like to introduce Greg Oates. He hasn't been with us today, so yeah, this is Greg. Chris is part of the team as well. We all know Chris. In addition to that, we've got Merrilyn and Janet, Seamus, Susan, Connie, and Emily who are online with us today. So what I'm going to do is to just give an introduction to out-of-field teaching within STEM in Australia, a bit of an introduction to our project and the theoretical framework that we use, and then introduce an analytical framework that has arisen from our literature review, and introduce a Y model which shows our current state. I won't probably get too far. I'll have to speak fairly. I won't speak quickly, but I'll miss some things from the slide because of time. But basically, the Australian education system, we have 7 states and territories, and our education is state-based. We do have a national curriculum, but each state translates that into a state or territory curriculum. Schools have autonomy over hiring and firing staff, so it's not controlled. Schools have say over how they translate our state-based curriculum into local curriculum. We don't have mandated textbooks. It's very much organic and based on school direction. Sometimes there is a bit of direction from the state government, or there is often some direction from the state government on school improvement matters, and sometimes on pedagogy. Professional development is generally not accredited, so teachers can decide what professional development they do, but it's often controlled by the principal of the school or the headmaster, except in New South Wales. New South Wales is quite different in that they do accredit their professional development. The other thing to bear in mind is that our teachers in all states apart from New South Wales are registered as teachers, not as subject teacher. So there's no recognition of the fact that I'm a science teacher or a maths teacher. I'm just registered as teacher. In New South Wales, they can get approval to teach. This is important to understand pathway to becoming in field, because there's no pathway to being accredited as a maths teacher. If I do this course to become an in-field maths teacher, means a teacher, it's not recognised anywhere. Except in New South Wales, where they'll get a code, they'll have approval to teach something. And that has influenced the pattern of uptake of professional development and re-qualification courses. It's much easier to do that in the state of New South Wales compared to into the other states. So that's what our project is looking at, how we can shift the culture within the current structures, but also propose new structures that would improve uptake. So we do have issues with current teacher shortages. That shows the percentage of teachers who are technically out of field. Greg's going to talk, and other parts of our maths team will be talking about out of field. The reason I've got those 4 subjects listed there is because that's what our research project is looking at. Maths, science, humanities, particularly geography, and English. Because we're finding that there's differences in the way out-of-field teaching is experienced depending on what subject you're in, but also the availability of professional experience or professional development, specifically for out-of-field. Australia is a bit of a hotspot for research, partly because of the research that we've been doing. There's a lot. I've been doing research on out-of-field teaching since 2009, and others in Australia have too. And we're using the term professional education because we want to include the broad range of education experiences that in-service teachers have. And as it says there, we've got the aim of our project is to model an ecology of an education system that will shift the cultural norms to valuing re-specialisation for out-of-field teachers. Very quickly, this is what we're planning to do. We're using an ecological systems theory because that enables us to take that cultural perspective and to look at the systems. And what's important is that assumption there. The teachers and schools are more likely to value and engage with professional experience and reduce the incidence of teaching out of field when there are defined pathways to coming in field. And at the moment, there isn't really a lot in some areas. So just very quickly wanting to introduce the Bronfenbrenner ecological systems theory. Has anyone used that or familiar with that theory here? So basically it is a system that recognises different parts of the ecosystem, beginning in the middle with the microsystem within which an out-of-field teacher is situated, and it's to do with their immediate relationships. And then the mesosystem recognises that there's relationships between different parts of the different microsystems. And then the exosystem is the indirect environment for the teacher. So it's the government policies, it's where professional learning often is situated. And then the macro system is the beliefs and values that actually inform that system. And then your chronosystem captures the changes that are occurring. So it's quite different to, you know, a normal ecosystem that shows things that are close or far away, but actually captures. I like the macro system particularly because that's what we're looking to shift. So that's that cultural shift. So what I'm going to report on here is, and quite quickly, is the results of our literature review. Basically, we came up with different categories and factors, and I'm not going to go into details, but it shows you here that we looked at policy documents, we looked at subject associations. A lot of people have associations with different subjects, so an English teacher or a science teacher association that teachers tap into. Is that understood? I'm not sure if other countries have that. What universities and PL providers provide, but also the research literature. So obviously different documents focused on different aspects of the out-of-field phenomenon. And we've put all of that into an analytical framework. Again, not going to go into detail there because I want to move on to, we went to an ecosystem map which these guys are going to actually focus on, but I want to get to here, which is our Y model. So these are our 3 pathways to becoming in-field. And this was actually developed from that previous ecosystem map. And this captures all of the data that we've got from those different sources that we've looked at. So beginning with the initial teacher education. Now this is an obvious place, this is where teachers become in-field because they've followed the normal pathway to becoming a science teacher or a maths teacher. And there's different policies there. And then if we look at the macro system that informs that, certainly in the Australian context, we've got critique of initial teacher education all the time. But there's certain attitudes and values about education, and there's the status of the profession within society generally that informs what the nature of the initial teacher education. In terms of the workplace, so often teachers in Australia will say, I don't need to do professional development because I learn on the job. This is about the learning on the job that happens at schools. And it's very much dictated by school leadership practices and what support they provide to teachers, and also the practices of assigning teachers to teach out. And there's certain macros or attitudes then that inform that. It's particularly different in rural regional situations. There is an understanding that we need to deal with the issue of out of field, but unfortunately, out of field teaching is often seen as a solution to the problem of teacher shortage. And that may be similar in other countries. But ultimately, it all comes down to the support practices within the school. So what resources are available, whether they attach mentors, what colleagues are available to support them. And then we have the professional education. And in different states and different subjects, the government sometimes are responding to provide funding and resources. But there's some interesting partnerships developing between universities, subject associations, governments, and other organisations to provide professional experience. And you can see some different examples of the professional development that's occurring. It's external, sometimes it's about certification, sometimes they're short courses. And then it's interesting to look at the role that the subject associations are playing in delivery. There's lots and lots of attitudes towards professional learning. I'm not going to go into all of those, but it really comes down to the responsibility of the individual teacher to decide what they're going to undertake. And there's these mediating factors that determine the uptake. So the attitudes to learning, the teacher attitude to learning, how much agency they have in choosing what to do, how available and accessible it is within the system, whether the principal even lets them do it. Sometimes principals don't give them, don't allow it, and how applicable it is for an out-of-field teacher. So someone who's not familiar with maths to do a professional development with experienced maths teachers. So in terms of ways forward, we are looking at how do we move away from this current state is what we're going to be looking at. You know, there's some possibilities around maybe looking at relationships between the Y pathways. But ultimately, the next part of the research is actually going to be looking at which of those factors are really relevant for people on the ground. And we might actually find that what's in the texts that we pulled out is different to what's actually on the ground. So that's going to be the really interesting part of our project. So that's the end of my presentation. I know that was quite quick. Yeah, so thank you.